Okay, let's start. By the way, if you have questions, you just have to take down note for that question and then you may raise it later before we will end our discussion. And of course, as a general rule, kagaya ng sa mga klase ninyo online, you will be instructed to mute your microphone and of course turn off your camera so that we can preserve the bandwidth of this online or virtual discussion so that technical difficulties will be minimized. Okay, so I will now share my screen and the attendance is ongoing, meaning to say, makikita lang attendance na to kung lumabas ka, anong oras ka magi-exit sa klase na to, and then what time ka papasok ulit. Okay? I'm sure you're very familiar with the attendance Google Meet. No, we also have our raise hand icon here at the bottom of the screen, so you can use that later, perhaps. By the time I will be sharing my screen, I cannot show or I can show. I cannot actually see you. So whoever na mag-raise ng question, so please raise your questions later. I hope I am audible enough. Okay, so let's start the discussion. Again, I have already posted the material sa Google Classroom natin so that you can read in advance and perhaps you can construct your questions in advance. Okay, this is module 4, development of classroom assessment tools. So in the previous lesson, we have discussed the process of developing instructional objectives. Siguro meron talaga sa inyo, no? Kung hindi man lahat, if not all, but siguro meron sa inyo, meron difficulty in constructing our instructional objectives. Constructing your instructional objectives is very important because you will be writing lesson plan later. And then when it comes to developing classroom assessment tools, you will be needing also the instructional objectives that you will be making. Okay. But before that, here are the learning outcomes of this lesson. At the end of this chapter or at the end of the discussion, you should be able to define the following terms: clarity of the learning target, appropriateness of assessment tools, yes, the word appropriateness, validity, reliability, fairness, objectivity, comprehensiveness, is in scoring and administering. Yes, because we will be administering your exam or your test. So kung ano ang ibig sabihin ng administration, we will know later. Hindi ito administration na principal, yung dean or whatever. So it's a different thing. Practicality and efficiency, table of specifications. Please take note that a table of specifications has an S on the end of the word specifications. Okay, so meron siyang S. Matching type of test, multiple choice test, true or false test, completion test, objective test, subjective test, STEM, destructors, and of course your key points. I'm sure you're very familiar. If most, if not all, siguro of the terms here, you are very familiar. Kasi nga, you are already exposed with the different tests, no? Starting siguro sa elementary pa kayo hanggang nag-college na, no? You're very familiar with the different types of tests. But then again, there are technicalities. Okay? So for you to create not a perfect test, but appropriate test, kailangan talaga siya ng skills and of course knowledge. Learning outcome number 2, discuss the different principles of testing and assessing. We have to identify the principles of testing. It is because we have to have the so-called appropriate test. Ito kasi yung concern natin, no? Dapat kasi kung ano yung tinuturo ni teacher, dapat malaman din niya or dapat makapagbigay din siya ng appropriate na assessment. So ano po yung ibig sabihin ng appropriate? Meaning to say, hindi siya best assessment. But the term there is what you call this appropriate, kung tugma pa, okay? I hope everyone is following. Okay pa ba tayo dyan?
Yes, sir.
Okay, sige. Next, number three, identify the different qualities of assessment tools. We have to identify their qualities, their features perhaps kasi nga gusto nating malaman kung ano yung tinatawag na strengths and weaknesses ng assessment tools. Kasi nga, again, hindi naman perfect yung tinatawag natin na assessment tools. Number four, identify the different steps in developing test items. Ito, no? Dito, kailangan ko i-discuss sa inyo kung paano ba mag-develop ng isang test item. At dito ninyo malalaman kung gaano siya ka-tedious, no? As a teacher. Okay. But then again, it's very challenging and very nice, no, na gagawa tayo ng test item. Siguro, nung mga panahong tayo ay estudyante pa hanggang ngayon, siguro, tayo ay always nasasagot ng mga test items. But now, you will be creating your own test items. I will be discussing the steps in developing table of specifications. Ano ba yung ibig sabihin ng table of specifications? Ano yung tinatawag na importansya ng table of specifications? Okay. Because before we could construct this item, meron tayong tinatawag na first step. Ano yung dapat mo nang gawin bago ka maka-create ng test item? Hindi pwedeng by the time matapos ka, like for example, a summative test, no, or isang periodical exam. Yung tinatawag ninyong periodical exam during your high school years, ang mga questions na nandoon ay hindi basta-bastang lumalabas. Okay? Hindi basta-bastang hindi basta-basta na okay, gusto ko itong topic na to, kaya gusto kong dapat lumabas ito sa exam. Hindi ko to gusto yung topic na to kasi very difficult. So ayoko siyang ilagay sa test paper, parang ganyan. Okay? So hindi pwede yan kasi nga meron tayong tinatawag na fairness. And of course, meron tayong tinatawag na objectivity na tinatawag na dapat lahat ng mga contents na nasa lesson ninyo, it should be the coverage of your test items. Okay. So, ang makakatulong niyan ang tinatawag nating table of specifications. And then, of course, since I will be discussing you the steps on how to develop specific table of specifications, you will be constructing your table of specifications using the different formats. If you can observe or kung nakabasa na kayo ng material na to, you can see na meron tayong different formats of table of specifications or TOS kung tinatawag. Pero technically wala naman talaga tayong specific format, no, of your table of specifications. Later on, ipapakita ko sa inyo kung ano lang yung dapat na actually pwede kayong gumawa ng own format of table of specifications basta yung essential parts ng table of specifications ay nandoon. Okay. So anyway, number 7, discuss the different format of assessment tools. Yes, the different format of assessment tools, subjective, objective tests, and so on. Number 8, determine the advantages and disadvantages of the different format of test item. Since I told you that there is no such thing as a best test item or format of test item. Now, it is quite imperative for us to look at the strengths and weaknesses of each test item or format of test item. We have to look at the advantages and disadvantages of the different format of test item. Kasi nga, ang goal natin dito, children, is to come up with an appropriate test item, not to come up a best format of test item. Okay, ang goal natin again is to have an appropriate assessment tool or test item. That is why, kailangan talaga natin malaman kung ano yung disadvantages at advantages ng different format of test item para alam natin. Number 9, identify the different rules in constructing multiple choice test, matching type test, completion test, true or false test, and then of course the last part is, since I will be showing you or I will be giving you different rules on how to construct those test items, this is now the time na kailangan ninyong gumawa. Okay? That is why, children, bibigyan nyo kayo ng pa-heads up, no? One of your ang tawag dito, final output for this for this topic here, for this module, module 4, is your ano, no? Meron tayong dapat makapag-submit kayo ng different format of task item. And then of course, you have to create your table of specifications. So ito yung mga expected outputs for module 4. Okay. Next, let's proceed. So please be remembered that during your previous lesson, the module 4, no, you're instructed to construct instructional objectives, educational objectives, and different types of objectives, no. So we have discussed the process of developing instructional objectives. So as discussed, the instructional objectives must be specific, measurable, and observable. So ito yung mga considerations natin, children, no? Tinatawag natin na instructional objectives. Sir, ano yung instructional objective again? Yung instructional objectives ay yung ginagamit natin sa klase. So like for example, yung mga prinisenta ko kanina, those are examples of instructional objectives. Pag sinasabi natin instructional objectives, children, it should be specific. They're specific. Ano bang gagawin ng estudyante? And the second one, it should be measurable. Kung sinasabi natin measure, sir, anong ibig sabihin na instructional objective must be measurable? Ang ibig sabihin, pwede siyang magawa ng test. So like for example, ang instructional objective natin ay, ano ba? At the end of the lesson, the students should be able to define what is photosynthesis. Now, meron ba tayong test item? Now, meron ba tayong assessment tool? Or ano ba yung format ng assessment tool na malalaman natin na yung estudyante ay nakapag-define ng photosynthesis? Meron, di ba? I think meron. Ano ba ang pwede? Anyone sa klase? If ever yung instructional objective natin ay the students should be able to define photosynthesis, ano ba yung pwedeng assessment tool? Ano ba yung kailangan nating test item para makita natin na yung estudyante can define photosynthesis? Anybody? You just have to turn on your mic and you can say something. Ano ang pwede? Yes? Somebody's talking? Ah,
Muhammad Khalid, sir. Muhammad
okay,
Khalid.
sige, dear. So, ano bang pwede?
Sub subjective test, sir. Essay.
So probably very good, no? A subjective test, for example. Pwedeng pa essay.
Essay.
Yes, yes.
Essay, sir. Yes, sir.
Essay, no? Tama ba?
Yes, sir.
Okay, very good. That's very good. No. By the way, hindi naman meron tayong different types of essay and that will be discussed later. And that is correct. Pwede tama yung tinatawag na essay. So meaning to say, that particular instructional
Short answer.
is measurable.
Short answer.
Yes, very good. Very good. Yes, we also have short response essay or short answer. That is still correct. So meaning, pwede pala. So kung pwede siyang magawa ng test, therefore, that instructional objective is measurable. Okay? Another thing is observable. So anong ibig sabihin ng observable, sir? Ito yung concern natin. If makikita natin na may pagbabago, yung estudyante alam natin na parang hindi marunong mag-define ng photosynthesis yung estudyante. Kasi nga parang yung assumption natin wala bang prior knowledge yung estudyante about photosynthesis. Now by the time you discuss the lesson about photosynthesis and by the time you gave a test for that student to define photosynthesis and right after giving the test, nakita mo na nakapag-define siya ng photosynthesis, meaning to say, observable yan. Coming from a student na hindi masyadong, ano ba yan, hindi masyadong alam yung photosynthesis, right after discussing, ay, alam na kung ano yung photosynthesis. Is observable. Okay? So the instructional objectives must be specific, measurable, and of course, observable. Next, must must develop test items that should match with the instructional objectives appropriately and accurately. Bullet number one, children, is very crucial. Very crucial. Yeah, very crucial, very fundamental, very basic. Ito yung basic ng mga teachers because you will be future teachers, children. So you must listen to this. Kasi nga, since I've been teaching, ano ba, for 8 years now, I there are really students encountered difficulties on how to construct test item or on how to format their test item. Hindi nila alam kung ano ba yung dapat kong gamiting test item sa lesson na to. Okay. So pinakaunang gawin, children, is you cannot construct your test items without looking into the instructional objective. Okay, it is very basic. It is a general, it's a rule of thumb and then general rule na sa children that if you are to create your test item, if you are to develop your test item, you have to go back to your instructional objectives. Babalik kayo sa instructional objectives. Now, so sa example na ginawa ko, baka sinabi ng kaklase ninyo that for that particular instructional objective, ang pwede, hindi yung tinatawag na best, no? Ang pwede or yung akma, appropriate na format of test item is essay, a short response essay. And that is correct. Okay? Hindi pwedeng ang nilagay mo doon, define photosynthesis, pero ang imuhang test item maghihimo kay enumeration. Diba? That's very funny. Correct. So, dito nyo makikita na kung ano yung lesson, dapat ito yung lalabas na test or your activities or assessment. Okay? Meron din tayong tinatawag kasi na mga ano ba yan, enrichment activities. Like for example, kung makikita ninyo, sir, bakit po based sa learning outcomes ng klase na ito, merong mga activities na parang hindi naman po masyadong akma. Okay? Meron kasi tayong tinatawag na mga enrichment activities children wherein parang hindi siya masyadong necessary for that enrichment activities na literally makikita or it will be reflected to your instructional objectives. Pero para siyang hindi naman siya requirement pero parang connected siya, somewhat like that. Okay? So you can have that. Okay? Ano ng mic? Sino ba yan? Okay, next would be the general principles of testing. There are 5 general principles of testing according to Ibel and Fresby, cited by Garcia 2008, listed 5 basic principles that should guide teachers in assessing the learning progress of the students. And of course, in developing their own assessment tools. So the principles are, of course, the first principle is measure all instructional objectives. Okay. When a teacher construct test items to measure the learning progress of the students, they should match all the learning objectives post during instruction. So ito yung ibig sabihin ko, children, na rule of thumb talaga, that by the time you will be constructing your test, it should measure all instructional objectives. So kung meron kang nilagay doon na at the end of the lesson, the student should be able to define photosynthesis, enumerate the processes of photosynthesis, ano pa ba? What else? Discuss the process of photosynthesis. Therefore, lahat ng sinabi mo sa instructional objectives, it should be reflected to your test item or to your test. Okay? Because the purpose of giving the instructional objectives to your students is para ma-focus yung estudyante natin. Kaya kung makikita ninyo, there are really instances that yung mga teachers ninyo, before sila magdi-discuss ng lesson, ipapakita muna nila yung tinatawag na learning outcomes or objectives ng lesson. The main purpose of that, children, is for you to be directed. Para alam ninyo kung saan tayo focus. At alam din ninyo, by the time or at the end of the chapter or at the end of the lesson, alam ninyo kung ano yung assessment na gagawin ni teacher. Okay? So, dapat kailangan nating malaman yung tinatawag na instructional objectives or objectives ng klase natin. That is why the first step in constructing a test, that is really the first step, is for the teacher to go back to the instructional objectives. Again, go back to the instructional objectives and think of an appropriate test. Principle number two, cover all the learning tasks. So ano pong ibig sabihin? The teacher should construct a test that contains a wide range of sampling of items. In this case, the teacher can determine the educational outcomes or abilities that the resulting scores are representatives of the total performance in the areas measured. Ang ibig sabihin, children, like for example, ano ba yan? Meron tayong, I don't know if na you're very familiar with the scenario, no? Because according to our teachers before, yung mga professors daw way back sa college, ang gagawin daw nila is especially siguro mga nurse, ano na to, no? Ang sabi kasi nila, you just have to the professor will come in sa klase, and then yung sasabihin na ng teacher, okay, please study chapters 1 to 5. Next meeting we will be having our exam. According to the teacher, the coverage of the exam, chapters 1 to 5. Pagdating sa klase, next meeting, and then by the time na meron na kayong exam, you would notice that lahat or most 90% of the questions are coming from chapter 1. Okay? That is very wrong. Okay? That is why really children, you really have to construct your table of specifications para alam natin kung ano yung tamang distribution ng items. Kasi basic yan children, no? Basic yan by the time you will be creating your table of specifications, heads up, kung saang part ng lesson mas mataas yung time na diniscuss ni teacher, expect mo mas marami rin yung test items na gagawin ni teacher. Like for example, meron kang 5 topics. The first topic siya yung nakalaan yung mas mahabang discussion or panahon ng discussion. Therefore, topic number 1 or topic number 5, dapat siya yung mas maraming test items na makikita sa test paper. Okay. So that is for the chapter or for the second principle. Next. The third principle is use appropriate test items. Ito na. Of course naman, you have to go back to your learning outcomes. You have to go back to the instructional objectives. And by that time, you have to think for an appropriate test item. Okay. It is because children, if you can come back to the first discussion on the basic terms, no, of assessment, evaluation, and testing, you would really know that um, taking tests or evaluating or assessing the performance of the students is very crucial in identifying the performance of the students. And that is why we really have to have an appropriate test items for them. The fourth principle is you have to make tests which is valid and reliable. Sir, when can we say that a test is valid and when can we say if the test is reliable? Anyway, we will be having our thorough discussion and validity and reliability siguro sa mga next part pa sa to ang lesson. But then again, I will just give you a very superficial description of valid and reliable. Now, ang ibig sabihin ng valid children, listen, when we say a valid test, if yung teacher, no, kung ang test na ibinigay ni teacher ay tama at akma sa kanyang content na discussion. Like for example, the discussion is all about multiplication table. Multiplication table, sorry. About multiplication. Dapat ang lalabas na questions ni teacher is for multiplication lang. Okay? Another thing, if the topic is all about photosynthesis, therefore, ang lalabas na mga questions sa test ni teacher should be about photosynthesis. Okay? Hindi siya pwedeng systems ng plants. Okay? Or parts ng plants. Okay? So, that is a valid test. Again, the teacher must construct a test that is valid so that it can measure what it is supposed to measure from the students. Kasi nga ang purpose natin, bakit tayo gumagawa ng test para alam natin kung ano yung kakayahan ng estudyante natin. Okay? So if your goal here is for the students to define what is photosynthesis, therefore make a test that can define for them to define photosynthesis. Okay? That is a valid test. Now, what is a reliable test? Ang sinabi dito, the test is reliable when the scores of the students remain the same or consistent when the teacher gives the same test for the second time. Yung reliability kasi is based on consistency. Ang ibig sabihin, kung binigay ni teacher yung test item for the second time around and the scores are still the same, meaning to say, your the test is very consistent, kung the same din. So that makes the test reliable. Okay? Again, when the scores of the students remain the same, hindi siya the same children na for example, si Fernando nag-take siya sa first setup, nag-test siya, yung score niya is 9/10. Sa second test naman, the same test, ang score ni Fernando is 8/10. Sir, is that the same or consistent? Yes, that is still the same or consistent. Okay? Kahit hindi sila the same, na 9 yung pinakauna, 8 yung pangalawa, that is still the same or consistent. Ano yung ibig sabihin, sir, pag hindi the same or hindi siya consistent? Ang ibig sabihin yan, for example, ang first one, yung score ni Fernando is 9. For the second time around, ang score ni Fernando is 1. Ang layo. Therefore, hindi consistent. So, dapat doon ra ang mga scores so that we can say that the test is reliable. So, that is when it comes to validity and reliability. I hope you get the point of the term, no? The fifth one is use tests to improve learning. Of course, children, the basic purpose and the fundamental purpose of testing is for you to give feedback to your students for them to improve their learning. Di ba? But at the same time, children, please take note that giving tests is not only for the benefit of your students, but it is also a benefit for you as a teacher. Tama? Now, it is because by the time you will see na yung mga estudyante bagsak lahat, you can question now you can now question your teaching capacity, your teaching skills. Pero parang merong mali sa pagtuturo ni teacher. Kasi nga, lahat ng estudyante bagsak. Okay? But by the time yung teacher, lahat ng estudyante pasado, isa lang yung bagsak, medyo may mali pa din si teacher. Okay? Pero hindi naman, not for all cases because of course, again, learning is a two-way process. No? The students should work on it. The teachers should work on it also. They have to meet halfway. Hindi pwedeng si estudyante lahat din, hindi pwedeng si teacher lahat din, and so on. Kasi nga, the new generation, no, or the 21st century setup of classroom is, dapat yung classroom is tinatawag natin na student-centered. No? Siguro medyo shocking sa Philippines kasi nga, yung setup ng education sa Philippines is very spoon-feeding. But if you could check outside Philippines, especially to our ano ba yan, sa Western countries, you would notice there that parang lahat na lang ng ginagawa ay nasa estudyante. Okay, because their classroom is very student-centered, and then the process are in it. Because in a way, medyo different sa atin kasi nga because of some factors, no? Factors, economy, and so on. So it's a very long discussion. So by the way, again, those are the 5 general principles of testing. They are very basic, but then again, they are the backbone of your testing. Okay, so measure all instructional objectives, cover all the learning tasks, and of course, use appropriate test items, make tests valid and reliable, and use tests to improve learning. Next, okay, it's already 9:10. Next is the principles of high quality assessment. Assessing the performance of every student is a very critical task for a classroom teacher. So kayo, magiging teacher kayo in the future, please take note that when you assess the performance of the student, you are actually assessing the whole performance of you as a teacher and then the students. No? Number two, teacher-made tests are developed by a classroom teacher to assess the learning progress of the students within classroom. Very sabotable, very understandable. When we say teacher-made tests, these are the tests na ginawa ni teacher. Teacher-made test, okay? Ginawa niya, like for example, baka right after this discussion, gagawa ako ng 10 item test and then sasagutan ninyo. That is a teacher-made test. Okay. Now, the strength of a teacher-made test lie in its applicability and relevance in the setting where they are utilized. Now, ang ibig sabihin, children, ng third bullet is that ang strength daw ng teacher-made test. Kasi nga, di ba, isa sa mga gagawin natin sa discussion na to is dapat alam natin yung strengths and weaknesses ng iba't ibang klase ng test. Tama? Okay. So let's try to look at now the teacher-made test. Ito yung mga test na ginawa agad ni teacher. Okay. Ang strength ng teacher-made test, children, lie on its applicability and relevance. Ang ibig sabihin, like for example, our topic is all about multiplication. Gumawa ako that is your quiz, for example. Gumawa si teacher ng quiz about multiplication. Therefore, yung test ni teacher is very applicable. Applicable, it is because the discussion is all about multiplication. Tama? Therefore, gagawa si teacher ng short test about multiplication. Sir, what is also relevance? That is also relevant. Why? Because the is multiplication. Ang ginawang test ni teacher ay multiplication and that is relevant. So that is why ito yung dalawang strength ng teacher-made test. But then again, merong problema sa tinatawag nating teacher-made test, children. When it comes to technicalities, okay? Kulang ng tinatawag na technicalities yung teacher-made test. So ano pong ibig sabihin? Di ba meron kayong tinatawag na standardized test? Can someone here, can someone talk, no? Kung ano yung mga standard test na or ano yung mga exam na na take nyo na. Sige, kailangan nyo lang mag turn on ng mic and then you can talk. Ano yung mga exam na na-take nyo na?
Sir, ano po, sir?
Ano yung test na na-take nyo na? Any
Yung
test na
standard
na-take nyo na?
test, sir?
Oh, yeah.
Not expert, sir.
Ano?
Sir, standardized test, sir?
Sige, pwede. Standardized test. Ano ba?
Not
Meron?
exam.
Mga college
Not.
entrance test, sir. Mga
Very
NAT,
good. Yes.
national
Very
achievement.
good. So, National Achievement Test, very good. Meron din tayo ng mga college entrance test, very good, very, very good. So, kung titignan ninyo yung NAT natin at saka yung college entrance test, those items na nandun ay hindi basta-bastang ginawa ni teacher. Tama? Di ba? Hindi siya ginawa ng isang tao, kundi ginawa siya ng group of people, and this group of people, they are very technical people. Meaning to say, we can say perhaps na the exam is somewhat standardized. Ito yung kakulangan ng tinatawag natin ng teacher-made test. Di ba? Si teacher lang yung gumagawa. Yung test na ginawa teacher, hindi naman niya pina-check muna sa principal. Hindi muna niya pina-check sa lahat ng teachers ng buong eskwelahan. Tama. Therefore, its weaknesses are the limited time and resources for the teacher to utilize the test. Ang ibig sabihin, hindi pwedeng gamitin ni teacher yung test bukas. Hindi pwedeng gamitin ni teacher yung 1 to 10 na test or dalawang set of problems next week. Bakit, sir? Kasi yung relevance at saka applicability ng teacher-made test ay magagamit kung saan or kung ano lang yung dapat niyang gamitin. Like for example kasi, since the discussion is all about multiplication, therefore the test is appropriate for the discussion of multiplication. Multiplication yung topic, baka iba naman. Okay? So its weaknesses are the limited time and resources for the teacher to utilize the test, and also some of the technicalities involved in the development of the assessment tools. You will know later na meron pala tayong mga technicalities when we develop assessment tools. At ito ang inyong kakulangan ng teacher-made test. Okay? Next, I hope you get that. Next, test constructors, no, kahit sino man sila, no, the teacher, especially the teachers, they are really the so-called leader of test constructors, teachers, kayo na mga future teachers. Test constructors believe that every assessment tool should possess good qualities. Good qualities, pero ang ating tatawagin dito is high quality assessment, principles of high quality assessment. Now, ano yung mga good qualities na tinatawag, children? Validity and reliability are the most common technical concepts in assessment. The term validity and reliability are both important talaga when we are going to have our assessment. Even children, by the time you will be writing your thesis and then merong nag-involve doon ng mga assessment tool, for example, your assessment tool will be subjected to validity and reliability test. So, makikita niyo yung importansya ng validity at reliability pa pag magte-test na kayo. Maririnig niyo yan sa panel advisor niyo. Ano ba ito? Kumusta yung validity ng test? Kumusta yung reliability ng test? Okay? So that is why ito yung tinatawag and reliability are the most common technical concepts in assessment. Okay. Assessment should be carefully developed so that it may serve whatever purpose it is intended for. That particular sentence or kanang a phrase is all about validity, children. Again, assessment should be carefully developed so that it may serve whatever purpose it is intended for. That is validity. And the test results must be consistent with the types of assessment that will be utilized, and that is reliability. For the third bullet is referring to validity and reliability. Next, the first principle of high quality assessment. Okay. Ang unang prinsipyo talaga in Filipino, clarity of the learning target. Ito yun. You would notice really na by discussing assessment, babalik talaga tayo sa tinatawag na we have to check first the learning target, or I hope you are not confused with the terms kasi nagbabago yung term. Kanina ang ginamit ng instructional objective, meron pa tayong tinatawag na learning outcomes. Dito ang ginamit na naman learning target. Okay? So learning target, synonymous lang yan ng tinatawag natin na learning objective or learning outcomes. Okay? So clarity of the learning, although children, hindi naman sila the same, although they have a slight differences naman sa definitions, but most likely they are of the same nature. So clarity of the learning target. The first one, before we can have a good quality assessment or a high quality assessment, we should have a very clear learning target. Kaya nga kanina, yung sinabi ko, instructional objectives must be specific, measurable, and observable. And that is a very clear learning target. Okay? Hindi makakagawa si teacher ng good assessment or high quality assessment if hindi masyadong klaro yung tinatawag natin na learning target. Okay. When a teacher plans for his classroom instruction, the learning target should be clearly stated and must be focused on student learning objectives rather than teacher activity. Ang ibig sabihin, si teacher, alam naman natin tayo mga teachers, no? Meron talaga tayong weakness na point. Like for example, I am a biology major, and then meron talagang part sa ano ba yan? Field namin sa biology na medyo hindi ko kaya. Parang ganyan, no? Although I really appreciated it during my master's kasi nga doon ko nakita yung beauty of that subject, of that particular field. But then again, the nature of the subject is very difficult, no? Although I love it, but the subject is very difficult. Now, by the time si teacher, ito yung i-discuss ni teacher for that particular time, ang gagawin ni teacher, hindi niya i-discuss. Or kung i-discuss man ni teacher, ang gagawin niya, sisiguraduhin niya na yung parte ng teacher ay medyo limited. Huwag ganun. Okay? Ang gagawin or iisipin natin, of course, by the time you will be creating your lesson plan, by the time you will be creating your lesson, the center of that thinking should be your students, not yourself. Do not think of yourself. Ito talaga yung mga selfless na mga teachers, no? Ito talaga yung role natin as a teacher that we really have to think the benefits the benefit of our students, not for the benefit of ourselves. Parang ganyan. Okay? So clarity of the learning target. The learning outcomes must be smart. Alam niyo naman yung smart, alam niyo na ba? Smart hindi itong mga internet service provider natin, ha? So when we say smart, very bugbog na smart. Smart, when we say S, S is specific. M is M is measurable. Letter A is attainable. R, R there stands for realistic. And of course, T is time-bound. Alam ng mga estudyante, bali, yung gagawin mong lesson or gagawin mong target should have a length of time. Tinatawag natin. Okay? Again, SMART is specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and of course, time-bound. Okay. If you are to research the acronym SMART for lesson planning or for learning outcomes, you would notice na meron silang differences pero yun yung punto, no? Especially the letter M, merong ibang word yung the letter A there, merong ibang term yung letter A, pero synonym lang, at saka R at saka T. Okay. Anyway, next, the performance task of the students should also be clearly stated kung ano yung gagawin ng estudyante. Kung magro-role play ba si estudyante, at the end of the lesson, ano ba si teacher, si estudyante, magko-construct ba siya ng something, that is a performance task. Dapat klaro at saka alam ni estudyante. Para alam ni estudyante kung ano yung gagawin niya, no, at the end of the lesson. Next, the teacher should also discuss clearly with the students the evaluation procedures, the criteria to be used, and the skills to be assessed in the task. You would notice, siguro sa mga ibang teacher, no, kung tayo man ngayon ay nag-face-to-face, no, kung hindi man, if you would notice siguro sa classroom natin, no, in a typical classroom setup, pag meron talagang tinatawag na performance task, dapat si teacher, i-discuss ni teacher how that performance task be evaluated. So, kung meron na, for example, for essay, you would notice na meron tayong rubric. Some of the teachers really discuss the content of the rubric. Pwede yan. Yung iba, kung may parole play man, yung teacher magbibigay yan ng criteria for judging. Okay? Stage presence, 50%, ganyan. And that should always be. Okay? That is why, by the time you will be creating your assessment, if merong mga ganyan, sir, kailangan po ba yan? Kailangan po ba talaga yan? Ang goal kasi natin dito, children, is dapat alam ng estudyante yung gagawin niya. Yun yung goal natin, no? Especially our high school, ang focus kasi natin, children, is the basic ed, no? So dapat talaga natin i-guide yung mga basic ed students natin. Okay. Next, a principle is on appropriateness of assessment tool. Kanina, we are talking about the clarity of the learning target. No? Ang susunod niyan is appropriateness of assessment tool. Ano yung pwede? Ano yung akma na assessment tool for that learning target? So I think I will be discussing 7 different types of assessment tool here. General na assessment tool nila. And then later on, I will be discussing the branching of this general type of test. Ha? Okay. Appropriateness of assessment tool. The type of test used should always match. Babalik na naman tayo, children. Please notice, no? Babalik talaga tayo ulit. The type of test used should always match the instructional objectives or learning outcomes of the subject matter posed during the delivery of the instruction. Babalik talaga tayo dyan. That is why it is very essential, very important for you to construct your learning target clearly. Kasi nga, babalikan natin yan by the time we are to choose now the appropriate assessment tool. Teachers should be skilled in choosing and developing assessment methods. Dahil sa gusto ko talagang i-discuss tong part na to especially kasi gusto ko na yung skills in choosing and developing assessment methods at least makuha nyo. No, I know that you cannot get this. I believe that you cannot get this in just a click of fingers. But then again, at least man lang, yung makakuha ninyo sa discussion na ito is yung essential parts. No? Kasi gusto ko na by the time you will become a future teacher, and even no, nagpa-practice pa kayo sa profession, for example, magpa-practice teaching na kayo, magpa-practicum, gusto ko na yung diniscuss ko na mga skills ay makukuha pa ninyo. No, remember nyo, hindi man siguro gaanong klaro, pero yung important points of choosing and developing assessment methods at least kuha ninyo. Okay? Next. So we are now we will now jump off to the first what you call this kind of assessment tool. Now we have objective test. By the way, we'll be discussing 7 kinds of assessment tools. The first one is objective. Let me run through, children. The first one is objective test. The second is subjective test. The third is performance assessment. Fourth is portfolio assessment. Fifth, the oral questioning. Sixth, observation technique. And then number 7 is the self-report. If you are to notice the terms or the kinds of assessment tools are general. General ito because later on, I will be discussing kung ano pa yung naka-branch out sa objective test, ano pa yung naka-branch out sa subjective test, and so on. Okay pa ba tayo dyan? Okay pa tayo?
Sir.
Buhay,
Yes,
buhay
Yes,
pa?
sir. Yes,
Okay, very
sir.
good.
Yes, sir.
Sige, please,
Yes, sir.
please bear with me, no? Kasi nga, ang part na to is very important. Okay. And then, bumabawi ako. Kasi nga, my goodness, di ba? Ang busy-busy. Actually, today is holiday. And then, some of my colleagues really, gusto nila talaga na mag-rest. Actually, gusto ko mag-rest, no? Kasi nga, parang, yung tulog, my goodness, term tulog, ay nako, hindi ko na alam kung ano yung feeling ng natutulog na mahaba-haba, no? So pero gusto ko mang gawin 'yon, but we really have to run through kahit man lang hindi ito yung perfect na discussion for the whole semester, but my goal here is for you to get the essential points of CPE 105. So kaya nga I really requested you to meet me here kahit alam ko na makapag-rest kayo ngayon because of the holiday, but thank you. So let's go on for the objective test. When we say objective test, children, ito yung gusto kong malaman ninyo. It requires students to select the correct response from several alternatives or to supply a word or short phrase to answer a question or complete a statement. Ibig sabihin, pag sinasabing objective test, merong options. Okay, hindi natin alam kung ilang options yan, pero sa options na yan, meron siyang correct answer or correct response. That is objective test. No? Ano ba yung maiisip natin pag sinasabi natin may isang tamang sagot? Of course, ang pinaka-example dyan is the true or false test. No? Di ba merong dalawang options? Kung titignan nyo Hindi talaga definition ng objective test, kundi description ng objective test. Meron tayong pagpipili ang dalawa for the true-false test. The true and then the false. And then, isa doon, merong tamang sagot. Meaning to say, true-false test belongs to objective test. Another thing is matching type. Kung titingnan niyo yung matching type children, you would notice na maraming options. Yes, letter A to Z. Di ba? Yung gagawin ni teacher nung matching type tayo. Merong 10 items dyan, pero yung options lalagpas pa yan ng 10 options. Tama? Para tayo ay malito. Kung titingnan ninyo, kahit madami mang options, pero isa lang yung tamang sagot. Sir, meron talagang mga teachers, sir, na uh, sa isang options or sa isang tamang sagot, dalawa yung items na, sir. For example, 1 and 3, sir, letter A po yung sagot. Actually, when it comes to technicalities, that is a bad test. It should be a no-no, no, for you teachers na merong dalawang items na isa lang yung tamang sagot. Hindi pwede yan. Okay? When it comes to technicalities, children. And of course, the very common and the very famous, the multiple choice questions, the MCQs. If you will notice, you have 4 options, A, B, C, D, or you have 5 options, A, B, C, D, E, pero sa 5 or sa 4 na options na yan, meron kang isang tamang sagot. That is the description of your objective test. Again, yung titingnan lang natin children, when we say objective test, merong pagpipilian. Merong pagpipilian pero isa lang yung tamang sagot. Okay? So that is objective test. And then of course, the word objective refers to the scoring. So anong ibig sabihin? Ako nag-exam ako. Yung exam ko is multiple choice lahat. Siguro si teacher, si teacher kasi parang meron siyang difficulty in checking the paper kasi parang wala ng time si teacher. Haggard si teacher, no? Haggard si teacher sa paggawa ng multiple choice test. Haggard pa si teacher sa pag-print ng exam and so on. So kaya, ang ginawa ni teacher sa MCQ niya ay pina-check niya sa iba. Siguro pina-check niya, although hindi ito pwede, no? Pero this is just an example for this situation lang. Pina-check ko kay Sir Jezreel, pina-check ko kay Ma'am Lian Kimada, pina-check ko yung isang section ko kay Ma'am Cherilyn, for example. Yung isang section ko naman, pina-check ko kay Ma'am Ganda Rosa. So sila yung nag-check. Sir, paano yan, sir? Paano nila alam yung, sir, yung pag-score, sir? Baka iba-iba sila ng pag-score, no? Because in an objective test, the scoring procedure is objective. So ano ibig sabihin? Meaning to say, kahit sino man yung mag-check ng aking test paper, alam nila. Alam nila na isa lang yung tamang sagot. Alam nila na yung question number 1, ang tamang sagot niyan ay letter A. Therefore, ang scoring procedure na gagamitin nila is just the same. Sir, ibig sabihin ba, sir? Sir, hindi sila ano ba yan? Sa Bisaya pa, sir, dili sila kabuot, sir. No? Hindi sila kabuot, sir. Ilang gusto, sir. Yung nilagay mo na key answer doon sa number 1, sir, is letter B. Pero yung gusto nila dapat na answer, sir, letter A, no. Because the test is objective, therefore the scoring is objective. They will follow kung ano lang yung tamang sagot. Okay? So, hindi ako worried kasi nga, meron ako ang answer key and therefore the scoring procedure is just the same. Okay? That is for the objective test. Now, on the other hand, when we say subjective test, ito yung sinabi kanina ni Khalid ba yun, no? Khalid, am I right? Your surname is Khalid ba yun? My dear.
Yes, sir. Muhammad
Okay.
Khalid.
Okay. So, sinabi ni Khalid kanina na yung sa example ko na learning outcomes na at the end of the lesson, the student should be able to define photosynthesis. According to Khalid, sir, yung pwede siguro na assessment niyan is subjective test. That is correct. Sir, siguro sir, yung sir, pwede siguro na short response, yes, that is still correct. Okay? So, when we say subjective test, children, it permits the student to organize and present an original answer. Sir, bakit mo nasabi na original answer, sir? Kasi nga, yung by the time you will ask the students to define photosynthesis, they will now constructing or they will now define the term photosynthesis based on their own understanding. Since that is based on their own understanding, therefore they will perhaps use authentic words coming from their minds. Okay? So perhaps that is a subjective test. And this is the nice thing. Di ba kung titingnan natin yung tinatawag natin na ano ba yun? Objective test, walang magagawang estudyante kasi nga sa lahat ng mga options na yan, meron yang isang tamang sagot. But for the case of subjective test, walang options. Walang pagpipilian. Ang gagawin lang ng estudyante is they have to organize their thoughts and of course they have to present an original answer. Now here's the problem. No? By the way, it includes either short answer or long general questions. Say for example, what is love? Okay. Or merong question na, how can you, ano ba? How can you say I love you to a blind man? For example, no? So that question requires a subjective test, no? Perhaps, and then the students should have to organize their thoughts, and then of course they have to present an original answer. Now, children, since the subjective test, I did mention wala siyang specific answer, no? Nakadepende kasi nga opinion niya ng estudyante. Now, meron tayong medyo nakikita na problema. Since the scoring of your objective test kanina is termed as objective na scoring type. In subjective test naman, it is very subjective. So ano pong ibig sabihin ng subjective, sir? Ang ibig sabihin niya, children, by the time someone will read your answer, that someone may form biases with your answer. Siguro, for example, what is love? Merong nagsagot na love is blind. Love is ganyan. All about money. Love is about like that. And then babasahin ko yung sagot niyo. So, at the back of my mind, magdidebate tayo. Bakit ganito yung sagot ni Khalid? Bakit ganito yung perspektibo niya about love? Bakit yung sa akin hindi? Iba. By the time meron tayong kaibahan ng idea, children, that's the time that the scoring procedure may be affected. Maapektuhan siya. Kasi nga, yung idea ni Khalid ay ayoko, hindi ko siya bet. Ang pangit ng idea ni Khalid, very negative siya about love. Ay, ito yung score niya. Okay? So that is why ang sinulat dito sa ikaapat na bullet natin, it is scored on an opinion basis. Okay. Since that is an opinion basis, children, kaya ginagawa ko talaga, kung naka-test paper man tayo, no? Ang ginagawa ko talaga by the time, kung meron man akong essay na type of question, isa-separate ko talaga yan, hindi ko talaga siya isasali sa buong papel. So, di ba, yung gagawin ng teacher, yung iba, meron silang identification, meron silang multiple choice, meron silang enumeration, for example. And then the last part is essay. Ayaw ko niyan. Gusto ko talaga yung essay, ilalabas ko talaga yan. And then of course, yung instruction ko talaga, they will write the name of that person who is writing that particular essay sa last part na ng paper or at the back of that paper para by the time na makita ko yung papel, hindi ko alam kung sino yung sumusulat. Kasi nga, there will be biases later on. So for example, another form of biases, no? Sorry. Um, for example, ayoko to ng batang ito. Hate ko siya. Parang ganyan yung story, no? Ayoko sa kanya kasi nga, very bad lungon. Grabe yung mga misbehavior niya sa klase, no? And then, by the time I will be answering my essay, meron akong prejudice. Sinasabing prejudice, pinangungunahan ko na yung mga salita na, hey, itong batang ito, ang pangit ng bata, very attitude to, na ganyan-ganyan. Therefore, my scoring procedure or my scoring will now form biases. Okay. Since, so 9:39. So, dali lang kukuha muna ako ng charger. Sige, you can breathe muna ha. Kukuha muna ako ng charger. Okay.
Hi.
Hello.
Hello.
Okay? Okay pa tayo dyan?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes
Yes,
po,
sir.
sir.
Can everyone follow naman?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes
Ah,
po.
okay. Sige. Next, so that's the bad thing, no? Since alam ng mga teachers na meron talagang formation of biases, meron tayong solution dyan. Sir, what is, because hindi talaga namin do away na meron talagang biases, sir. Okay? So, ito yung gagawin natin. By the time you will be writing essays, no, yung mga own opinion or mga opinion basis yung tinatawag natin ng mga test, for example, especially subjective test, ang gagawin talaga ni teacher, dapat si teacher will be providing a rubric or a checklist for that essay. Okay? Para the bias will be, sir, ano ba? Perfect po ba na yung tinatawag natin na biases ay mawala po talaga? Perhaps hindi talaga, but it will be minimized because of the scoring procedure, or sorry, because of that rubric. Especially if you will be creating a rubric which is very specific, yung content ng rubric is very specific, perhaps the biases, and then yeah, the biases of scoring your essay will be minimized. Okay, so that is for subjective test. I hope you get that. Next type of assessment we have is the performance assessment. Okay, students are asked to perform real-world tasks. Ano bang ibig sabihin ng real-world? Very authentic. No, like for example, ang gagawin ng estudyante ay maging, for example, maging investigador. Siguro ang topic natin is all about environment. Okay? And then meron kayong project, no, group project, and then you will be getting the role of an investigator, a writer, a video producer, a script writer, for example. Okay, that is an example of a performance assessment or performance task. It can measure learning objectives which focus on the ability of the students to demonstrate skills or knowledge in real life situations. Although you may perceive that as a role playing, but then again, you will, ang napakaganda kasi nito, dito makikita yung tinatagong skills ng estudyante, no? If you are now an investigator and then you have now that particular project, of course, alam natin kung ano yung dapat ninyong gawin. Tama? Okay. At gagawin niyo yan. Okay. Next. Next is what we call, sorry. Next we have is a portfolio assessment. Okay, assessment based on the systematic, longitudinal collection of student work created in response to specific known instructional objectives and evaluated in relation to the same criteria. Ang portfolio assessment, I'm sure siguro sa mga klase ninyo, meron nga kayong narinig na, okay, isa sa mga gagawin nyo is ang portfolio. Ang ibig sabihin, yung ginawang basis nila, okay, if you become a teacher, you will notice na yung mga teacher ninyo or nung siguro high school or elementary, pinapadala kayo ni teacher ng ano ba yan? Yung envelope ba yung tinatawag? Yeah, envelope, no? Clear envelope ba yan or brown envelope? And then ang instruction ni teacher, especially siguro sa science or language siguro na subject, ang sasabihin ni teacher, okay, please place your corrected ano ba yan? Corrected test papers, your output in your envelope. And then your envelope will be submitted at the end of our school year, and I will check that, and meron niyang puntos. That is an example of a portfolio assessment. The teacher will be collecting the the ano siya, the performance of the students, no, longitudinal. Bakit sinabi siya ng longitudinal? Kasi nga ang haba. For example, for the whole semester, for the whole 3 months, ganyan. Kasi dito makikita kung ano yung performance na ng estudyante. No? Dito makikita, and that is for portfolio assessment. Another thing is oral questioning. This one is very common na nangyayari sa klase natin, pero hindi masyadong binibigyang pansin, no? Di ba yung estudyante, si teacher, every time talaga na magkaklase itong teacher na to, natitense talaga kayo. Kasi by the time na merong sasabihin si teacher, agad-agad may tanong si teacher. Like for example, isang sentence lang yung binasa ni teacher, may pa any question pa dyan si teacher. Or may tanong si teacher. Okay? Oral questioning. But then again, yung tinatawag natin na oral questioning or asking questions, they are very essential. Essential in a way, children, that you can get immediate feedback to your students. Kaya nga si teacher palagi ang nagtatanong, no? Pero later on, you will notice sa mga higher pa ninyo na mga subjects, no? You will be informed that there are a lot of techniques pa on asking questions. Okay, meron din tayong mga technique dyan. The first one, collecting assessment data by asking questions. So for example, okay, our topic is all about photosynthesis. Yes. Meron tayong pa reading. Sinabi ko last meeting or last week na, okay, read in advance photosynthesis. And then I ask, okay, who can tell me the processes of photosynthesis? Diba? That is collecting assessment data by asking questions. The second one, the most commonly used of all forms of assessment in class. Ito yung sinabi ko na parati talaga nangyayari sa klase. Very common, no? Kasi nga, assessment din siya, no? Kasi nga, all the time for 1.5 hours, siguro 1.5 hours, si teacher palagi siyang nagtatanong. Third bullet, the ability of the students to communicate orally is very relevant to this type of assessment. And this is a form of formative assessment. I believe during the, ano ba yan? Sa mga previous topics na natin, alam niyo na, or you did encounter the term formative assessment. No? Ibig sabihin ng formative assessment, nangyayari yan during instruction. So that is it, no? That is for oral questioning. The next one we have is the observation technique. This is the sixth one. When we say observation technique, the teacher will observe how students carry out certain activities, either observing the process or product. So yung mga teachers kasi, they are really required to observe students. That's very basic na gagawin ni teacher. By the time papasok si teacher ng klase, by the time si teacher magsasalita in front, yung mata ni teacher is actually observing. By the time you are answering activities, doing activities, si teacher nag-observe pa rin. By the time you are asking questions and how you ask questions, si teacher nag-observe pa rin. By the time you will be taking the 1 to 10 test, while si teacher nag-dictate ng question, for example, or pinapakita sa board, nag-observe pa rin si teacher. By the time you will be checking the paper, the teacher is observing you. By the time na lalabas kayo ng klase, the teacher is observing you. So, ang daming ginawa ni teacher, habang si teacher ay nasa sa harap ninyo, nagmumultitask si teacher, actually. That is why yung role talaga ng teacher is very exhausting. Very exhausting yet very fulfilling. Okay? Next. There are two types of observation techniques, children. We have the term formal, we have the term formal and informal observation. Sir, ano pong ibig sabihin ng formal at saka informal observation? In observing, example na lang tayo, no? Because it's 9:49. Sa formal observation, children, an example of formal observation is during reporting. No, si teacher na best in reporting, si teacher, nagbigay si teacher ng topic, plak, 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 okay. Okay, topic number one, okay, para sa'yo. Number two, para sa'yo. Number three, para sa'yo. Nasa'yo na ng lahat, no? Okay, so that particular observation, by the time you will be reporting, that is part of what we call formal observation. Kasi meron kang preparation, no? When it comes to preparation, nag-prepare ka ng PowerPoint presentation, you research on it, you prepare different materials, and of course, you are wearing an attire. Hindi naman talaga formal, but an attire which is not the usual attire na sinusuot mo pagpapasok ka ng klase. Therefore, that is a formal observation. Okay. When we say informal observation, another form example of formal observation is I think that during the defense, this is defense also. Another is the informal observation. Very good example of informal observation is during group activity. Si teacher nagpa-group activity, okay. Before we will end the discussion, before I will be giving you a test, we will be having a group activity. Okay, count one to five, blah blah blah, one to okay. Group one dito, group two, and so on. By the time nabigay na ni teacher yung materials for the group activity, you would notice that the teacher will roam around the classroom. No, magtanaw-tanaw si teacher. Okay, kumusta? Okay. That is an example of an informal observation. Okay? Another thing, if you're doing your laboratory activities or laboratory work inside your, of course, your lab science laboratory, for example, yung teacher talaga mag-roam around talaga si teacher. Okay? And that is, again, an example of informal observation. Even in a class, kahit hindi pa kayo nag-group activity, kung ano man, that is still an example of informal observation. Okay? I hope you get the gist of your formal and informal observations. And for the last part, before we will end the discussion, we will end it here because it's already 9:52 and I will be entertaining questions, perhaps. The last part of kind of assessment tool is what we call the self-report. Okay. The responses of the students may be used to evaluate both performance and attitude. Assessment tools could include sentence completion, Likert scales, checklists, or holistic skills. I will tell you the description of those skills later. Self-report. I'm sure siguro kayo naka-experience na kayo ng ano ba yan, peer rating, kung tinatawag. Ako by the time, kasi ako pag naglalab ako, during my conduct of laboratory activity, right after or before talaga mag-end yung laboratory schedule namin, I will give them a peer rating. Yung peer rating doon ay i-rate nila yung cell, ilang kaugalingon, ilang i-rate. And then of course, the members of the group will also be rated. Okay? And then, when we say completion, of course, naka-blank. Okay. When we say Likert scales children, I'm sure naka-answer na siguro kayo ng mga survey, no? When we say Likert scales, strongly agree, neutral, disagree, strongly disagree. Yun. That is an example of a Likert scale. Checklist, alam niyo na yan. Parang siyang rubric pero may form of checking, no? And then holistic skills. Okay? Okay, so I think we will end the discussion here because it's already 9:53. If you have questions, please ask it now.
Sir,
Are there any clarifications?
sir,
Yes,
sir. Ah, sir, may question po ako, sir.
nor?
Sir, yes, sir.
Sige.
Sir, yung sabi mo, sir, na yung scores dapat ng students na remain the same or pag magbibigay ulit siya ng second time na pang quiz sa same test na ano po yung minimin doon na second time, sir? Yun po ba yung pag may removal or for example na multiplication yung topic then twice siya mag-test?
Very good question. Yung reliability test, my dear, is titingnan lang, proseso siya, titingnan lang kung yung test ba nagawa ni teacher is consistent ba, no? Pag sinasabing consistent, meaning to say, meron kasing mga test children na pag mag-take ka test karon, parang ang score mo ay mataas, siguro perfect. And then by the time you will be taking the exam the next time, and then the same talaga yung content at saka type of test, yung score mo ay mababa. Parang ganyan. Therefore, the type of asking questions ay hindi siya reliable. O ibig sabihin. Okay? Pero hindi talaga siya gaanong nangyari, pero hindi talaga siya gaanong nangyari sa classroom na okay, magte-take ako ng ipapatake ko to for the second time around. Meron siyang purpose bakit siya kailangan nating i-take for the second time around.
Sir, yung pang
Yes.
second time, sir, na sa exam na yun, sir, or for example na first quiz, then second quiz, next meeting na naman na same topic, or sa exam na talaga yung second
O-
test.
okay. Pwede siya there. For example, ang purpose mo lang, no? Basta yung purpose mo lang is malaman kung consistent ba talaga yung ginawa mong exam. Pwede naman na ipatake mo sila next week. Pero iba na yung discussion. Kasi ang purpose lang natin para malaman natin kung consistent ba yung structure ng test natin. In a way, you will appreciate this more at saka you will know really kung ano talaga yung ibig sabihin talaga ng reliability pag gagawa niyo na ito ng activity, no? Kasi nga again, yung output niyo for this module, you will be creating your item. And then we will identify the validity and reliability of your test. Okay?
Thank you,
So,
sir.
yes, dear. Anyway, siguro hindi pa siya gaanong klaro ngayon, yung term na reliability. Yung pinakaklaro sa dalawa kasi yung validity, no? Klaro yun. Pero yung reliability, titinan talaga natin. Okay? Kung ano talaga yung reliability based on your constructed test item later na gagawin niyo. Okay? Thank you for that question. Another question. May tanong pa ba? Wala na?
So far, sir.
None. Okay. Okay. Sige, so far I have meron tayong present na 33 students. Okay. If you don't have any questions, I think we will end it here and then we will discuss the second part pa next meeting before I will post some activities. Okay. I will be posting activities related to what we discussed, no? And the next meeting we'll also discuss the other one. Yung binigay ko sa inyo na presentation, that is the whole coverage na lahat na yon. Okay? So I hope you will read that in advance so that you can ask questions or kung meron talaga kayong hindi gaanong naintindihan, you can ask it here. Mas maganda kasi dito yung masasagot ko siya dito kumpara nung sa message. I cannot really reply. I cannot give you an assurance na masasagot ko talaga kayo kasi nga marami talagang hindi ko alam kung ano na tong. Okay, nakapag-attendance na po tayo. By the way, the attendance is automatic. Automatic yan. Makikita dito sa attendance kung na you are, kung lumabas kayo at saka bumalik kayo, makikita siya dito. Okay. Likert scale. Pilot test? Pilot test.
Sir,
Akali?
yan, sir.
Ah,
Yes, sir. Yan, sir, yung sa reliability, sir. Yan yung, sir, yung minimin mo, sir. Na-encounter ko lang po siya, sir, na pag sa mag-survey na, sir, yung questionnaire, sir, sa research.
hmm. Sa pilot testing kasi, bakit natin pinapilot ang isang test is, of course, for us to know, maraming purpose. For example, meron kang test na kinuha mo galing sa US. Yung questions, the questionnaire which is coming from the US, meron talagang item doon sa question, sa survey questionnaire na hindi appropriate sa Philippines. Kasi nga, by the time you will be writing a questionnaire, this is the other thing about survey test. By the time kasi a person will construct a survey test, it is based on their culture. Naka-culture yan. Kaya ang gagawin talaga ng researcher, pinaka-basic na itatanong ng advisor ng thesis, we are talking about thesis here kasi CPE 105 is para siyang the same siya ng ano natin, ng thesis writing or research method natin. No? The CPE 198. Kung sino man yung kumuha ng CPE 198 dito, somewhat the same siya. Pinaka-automatic yan, children, na sasabihin niya ng advisor saan galing itong test item na ito or test questionnaire. Pag sasabihin mo, ma'am, galing po siya Middle East. Okay, Middle East. And then I am using it here, ma'am, because Marawi City is an Islamic city. I want to use it here, ma'am, kasi parang appropriate siya. Your advisor will automatically give you an advice. Okay, hindi natin alam kung appropriate ba talaga siya sa Pilipinas. No, although Marawi City is an Islamic city, but you are in the setup of Philippines, therefore meron talaga yung kaibahan. So ang i-advise ni advisor ng thesis at saka ng panel, okay, pilot test natin. The purpose nun of pilot testing is for us to identify kung ano yung mga items ang akma para sa Pilipinas or akma para sa Marawi City. That is one of the purpose of the pilot testing. Yes, dear. Also, sa pilot testing, pwede rin natin makuha yung validity at saka reliability. Very good. No?
Okay, sir.
Yeah. Okay. I hope I am not expecting 100% understanding for this lesson. Ha? My goal here is for you to get at least 1% no, of the discussion. Okay na yan. Any questions? It's already 10:01. Wala na? Okay, if you don't have
Wala na
any
po, sir.
questions, okay, sige, wami ka. Okay, if you don't have any questions, you can leave the classroom and please expect the activity or the assessment sa Google Classroom. The coverage is lahat ng na-discuss ko today.
Yes po, sir.
Okay, thank you so
Yes,
much for
yes
coming
po,
in,
sir.
children. See you
Goodbye,
later.
sir.
Bye-bye. Keep safe. You can now
Goodbye,
leave
sir.
the
Thank you so
Bye,
much,
classroom.
sir.
sir. Bye, sir.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye, sir.
Bye. Nadia, pwede ka nang lumabas, Nadia.
Yes, sir. Loading po kasi, sir. Thank you po.
Okay, sige, bye.
Bye, sir. God bless.
God bless.